And thank you, everyone. Today we are very excited to share with you this opportunity. It's a great perk of this year's program. We are really psyched to have Corbin with us. And yeah, Corbin, tell us about what is awaiting for folks today.
All right. Well, we are here to talk about your pitch video. So yeah, welcome everyone, which is super exciting. Thank you guys for taking the time out of your awesome and busy schedules to tune in to this podcast / video / awesomeness, right? So anyway, that being said, today we're going to be diving in to how to make a pitch video, which is basically what it's all about, right? So think of this as a filmmaking kind of 101 masterclass. We are going to try to cover quite a bit of stuff today, and I'm certain that some of you may already be familiar with quite a few of the concepts. However, hopefully there are a few gems that you can take away from this workshop regardless. So well, hopefully that's the case. Now, I know this whole video making process can be a bit overwhelming, and I know from experience that it's often the little things that will make or break your video. So let's just get started and learn how to make an awesome pitch video. All right, so in this workshop, we're going to discuss, and we're going to start with storytelling, basically understanding storytelling, screenwriting, storyboarding, the whole 9 yards. We're then going to follow that by selecting the right tools for your video, such as video editing software and AI-focused apps, because AI is now a thing and we might as well use it, right? We're also going to discuss how to collect your video content, including filming and lighting techniques, providing guidance on editing your video to adding music and voiceover. Last but not least, we'll discuss the export process, including the best export settings for your video. During the Q&A, of course, you can ask any questions that may arise, which I guarantee things will by the end of the workshop, hopefully you should have a comprehensive understanding of how to create a pitch video. So let's kind of jump into this stuff, guys. Yeah. All right. So the first thing we need to do is understand the power of storytelling, right? So storytelling is a fundamental part of human communication, and it has been used for countless centuries to convey messages, emotions, and experiences. At its core, storytelling is the art of communicating a message or idea through narrative structure. It's a way of engaging an audience and getting them emotionally invested in the story being told, right? So there are several basic principles that can be applied to any type of story, whether it's a book, movie, or in this case, a pitch video, right? The first is character, right? Every story needs a protagonist, someone for the audience to root for and care about. This character should be relatable and sympathetic, with goals and desires that the audience can understand and identify with, okay? Next is conflict. Conflict is the driving force behind any story. It's what creates tension, drama, and stakes. The protagonist should face obstacles and challenges that test their character and push them to the limits. The third is plot. The plot is the sequence of events that make up the story. It should be structured in a way that creates rising tension and builds toward a climax. Next is theme. The theme is the underlying message or idea that the story is trying to convey. It can be something as simple as good triumphs over evil, or as complex as the commentary on human nature, right? Next is setting. This is where the story obviously takes place. Setting can have a significant impact on the story and its themes, as well as help to create a mood or atmosphere. Finally, we have the style, and the style of storytelling is the unique voice or tone of the storyteller, right? It can be formal or informal, serious or humorous. It should reflect the intended audience and the message being conveyed, okay? Now, with all that being said, as you learned in Dr. April's storytelling seminar, hopefully, or at least hopefully you learned, we'll see, a compelling story can engage your audience, build trust, and help them connect with you and your business. From a marketing perspective, storytelling is about communicating a brand's values and connecting with customers. It's about identifying who the customer is and crafting a narrative that resonates with them. In marketing, the story is often centered around the product or service being sold and how it solves a problem or fulfills a need for the customer. By comparison, from a filmmaking perspective, storytelling is about creating an emotional connection with the audience through characters, plots, and themes. It's about taking a viewer or taking your viewers on a journey and making them care deeply about what happens to the characters. Successful filmmakers understand that audiences are looking for an emotional experience that they can relate to and connect with. This is achieved by crafting a compelling story arc with relatable characters, building tension and conflict, and delivering a satisfying resolution. Okay, so with all that being said, let's talk about screenwriting. So screenwriting, right, is the specific type of storytelling that is focused on writing for the screen, film, television, web, whatever, right? Unlike any form of storytelling, screenwriting is primarily concerned with visual storytelling, using the power of images and sound to convey a story. One of the key differences between screenwriting and other types of storytelling is the need to structure the story in a way that works well for the screen. Screenplays typically follow a 3-act structure, which is designed to keep the audience engaged and interested in the story. In screenwriting, it's important to write in the present tense. So often that I see past or future, like always write in the present. It creates a sense of immediacy and a sense of being in the moment for the reader and, of course, the eventual viewer. This means that the action is described as it's happening on screen. For example, right, as you see, like instead of writing she thought about the decision for a long time, you would write she stares at the two options on the table, her hand hovering over each before finally choosing one, right? They both convey the same type of message, but yet the other one is far more visual and actionable, especially for the person on screen. Screenwriting is focused on the visual elements of the story, right? So the writer should only describe what can be seen on screen. This means avoiding inner dialogue and describing the character's thoughts or feelings unless they can be conveyed through visual cues, right? So another example, instead of writing she feels sad and alone, you would write she slumps onto the couch, hugging a pillow to her chest, right? Or something along those lines. Again, it's all about conveying something that can be seen on screen. Now, let's briefly talk about formatting. And while your pitch video script doesn't need to be perfect, there are some industry standard formatting guidelines I wanted you to be aware of should you ever decide you wanted to write for your next great movie idea, right? These guidelines are used to make scripts easy to read and understand by industry professionals like producers, actors, and directors, whatever. So let's quickly highlight a few of the most prominent ones that you're going to see, the first are slug lines, right? And slug lines are the scene heading, right? It's the one-line description of location and time of day for each scene. It should be in all caps and placed at the beginning of each scene. Example, interior coffee shop day, right? Action lines, right? Action lines describe what is happening in the scene. They should be brief and to the point, focusing on what the audience can see and hear on screen. Avoid inner thoughts, feelings, motivations, right? Again, for example, John walks into the coffee shop, scanning the room for a place to sit. Character names. Character names should be in all caps and centered above their respective dialogue. Again, as you see, John, hey, is the seat taken, but the character name is in caps. Dialogue should be centered and indented from the left margin. It should be concise and natural sounding as possible, right? Jane, here's an example. Jane, no, go ahead. John sits down for the table, thanks, what are you reading? Whatever, something along those lines, right? You get the idea. INT versus EXT. INT are interior, right? It's obviously when it takes place inside. EXT is exterior, outside, right? As you can see in those examples. Day night, I mean, that's pretty self-explanatory, but if you're going to shoot during the day, same thing. It's that scene takes place in the daytime or nighttime, right? The best part with formatting these days is that the majority of screenwriting programs will automatically do all this stuff for you. However, it's just important to be aware of the proper formatting since no program is perfect, right? All right, so now with all that fun stuff being said, let's talk about 4 storytelling strategies to help keep your audience for your pitch video engaged. The first is to build tension and conflict. Like we talked about, stories are more interesting when there is tension and conflict. You want to create obstacles to overcome and keep your audience guessing about what will happen next. You want to use humor, or ideally use humor. Humor can be a powerful tool in storytelling. right? Use it to break tension or to create a sense of levity in your story. Keep it simple. Don't overload your story with unnecessary details or plot points. Just keep it simple and easy to follow so your audience can focus on the main narrative. Show, and definitely don't tell. Instead of telling your audience what's happening, show it to them through action, dialogue, and behavior. So really, at this point, the question is, what kind of story are you going to tell? At the end of the day, it's essential to consider your audience's perspective and what they're looking for. In this case, when it comes to your pitch video, you want to create a story that resonates with your viewers and inspires them to take action. All right, so we got all the basics, right? So we got all that fun stuff down. So let's put this all together for your pitch video, right? So here's a simple, fun and formula for creating your thing, right? Okay, so number one, you want to start with a hook. In the first few seconds of your video, you need to grab the viewer's attention and make them interested in what you have to say. This can be done through a shocking statistic, a provocative statement, or a compelling visual, right? The opening should spike their curiosity and compel them to keep watching. And you can kind of try to guess what kind of story I'm telling in this series of images. All right, here we go. Then you want to identify the problem. Once you have the viewer's attention, it's important to establish what problem you are trying to solve. Then you want to introduce the hero. And of course, the hero in this case is you or your team. You want to introduce, like, who's trying to solve the problem? You know, at this point, it's important to make yourselves relatable and to establish why you are uniquely qualified to solve said problem. Then you want to provide context. Next, provide some context for problems, for the problem that you presented and how it affects people's lives. It can include personal anecdotes, real-world examples, or expert insights. Then as you move into the middle of your story, it's important to build tension and create a sense of urgency around the problem. This can be done through emotional appeals, compelling visuals, or dramatic music. Next, you want to offer a solution. Once you've built up the tension, it's time to offer a solution. This can be your product, your service, or any other type of solution that addresses the problem that you've established. And after that, of course, once you've introduced your solution, it's now important to show that it can make a tangible difference in people's lives. It can be done through case studies, testimonials, or other type of proof. Finally, it's important to end your story with the call to action. This can be a request for donations, a call for volunteers, or investment, or any other type of action that supports your organization's mission. So crafting a compelling story for your pitch video just involves really the basics of storytelling that we went over, and it combines with the fundamental strategies for keeping your audience engaged, right? So I know you guys are going to learn all about what makes a great pitch in your upcoming pitch workshop with Nick, but as a quick little intro to that, basically, when it comes to creating a pitch, creating a relatable problem can help you catch your audience's heart and attention. You can establish authority by showing how your product or service can solve the problem that you yourself have experienced. Your pitch should be clear, concise, and authentic, making sure that you give it, but make sure that as you give it, you speak with energy and conviction. It's all about creating a pitch that captivates your audience and leaves them eager to learn more about what you have to offer. Right? All right, now we've covered the importance of storytelling. Let's move on to the tools and software that you will need. There are tons of options out there, even if you have little to no experience in video production. And I'm not going to go over or list everything because there's just way too much for that. I'm just going to give you some of the highlights based on my experience and personal preference. Now, before we begin, I'm going to assume you all have a computer to work with. All the software and recommendations today will be tailored to using a Mac or PC. If you want to know about editing on your phone, you can check out some of the additional resources that I will send in a PDF after the fact, right? On mobile video editing and all that good stuff. Due to our limited time, I'm also not going to deep dive into how to use every piece of software. I'll list my personal favorites and suggested follow-up resources on how to use each tool. All right, so we're going to start with editing. First on our list is the editing software. This is arguably the most important tool for putting your video together. There are many video editing software options available, including Adobe Premiere Pro, Final Cut Pro, iMovie, so forth. From a more advanced perspective, I, of course, highly recommend Premiere Pro. It has the most robust and well-rounded settings. However, one of the best and simplest editors for beginners is honestly, in my opinion, with Descript. It will allow you to edit your video just like you edit a text document, creating or taking out a lot of the unnecessary guesswork. We won't get into a lot of the editing or specifics just yet, but just know that those are my top 2 recommendations. Next is screenwriting and storyboarding. There are a few options out there, but Celtics is the best free option for screenwriting. However, a solid all-in-one storyboarding screenwriting solution is StudioBinder, which is only like $30. But if you're serious and actually serious about screenwriting in any capacity, the best by far is Final Draft, without a doubt. So that's something to consider. All right. So AI. Okay, we're gonna talk a little bit about AI because AI is the new thing, but also can rapidly speed up your production workflow. Right. There are plenty of free options out there that can help you with everything from writing your script, drawing your storyboards. Basically from a beginner perspective, these tools will massively save time while increasing your video's final quality, which is awesome. So, I mean, if you haven't heard of it yet, I strongly recommend you check out ChatGPT, which is great. It can help you with everything from writing your script to planning your shot lists to guidance on the storytelling process as a whole. It's definitely the best place to start when you need to go from an idea to a fully fledged written concept. Another phenomenal tool is Midjourney. It's an AI art creation engine. With Midjourney, you can easily create your storyboard without any prior art or drawing skills. You can also create prototypes or unique imagery related to your product or business, even if you're still just in the ideation phase, which is awesome. All right, cool. Now with all that behind us, we've discussed the tools and software. Let's move on to the fun part, which is making the actual video. As a quick little introduction to some industry vernacular, filmmaking is often broken up into 3 parts: pre-production, production, and post-production. Pre-production, as you can probably guess, is the planning, and in my opinion, the most important stage by far. It's where your overall concept is developed, your script is written, your storyboard is drawn, and all the necessary resources like locations and equipment is secured. This stage lays the groundwork for the entire project and ensures that everything runs smoothly. Production is the actual filming, recording of the thing, right? This stage involves setting up your cameras and other equipment, preparing the set, and capturing your desired footage. Post-production is the final stage where everything is put together. It's where you edit your video, add visual effects or animation, and the final export and delivery of your finished video. All right, with all that in mind, let's start with pre-production. By this point, of course, you should be familiar with the storytelling process and screenwriting, right? So let's as a fun little thing, let's run through this process together, assuming we're going to use some of the awesome tools laid out in the last section. I don't know if anybody from the Cut project is here, but I decided to use you guys as my little example here. So I hope you guys don't mind if I use that. So in ChatGPT, I typed in the following prompt. Okay, write a script for a pitch video that adequately represents the following log line. The Cup project is a reusable cup catering service for large events. We bring reusable cups to use at events instead of single-use disposable cups, helping events save money and reduce waste, right? So that was just that's what I got. So then this is the script that it came up with, which is awesome. I'm like, put together a script for me, and it did, which is amazing, right? Obviously, I'm not going to read this whole thing, but you get the idea. It's pretty neat that it just did that. So awesome. So then we have the script. Okay, cool. Now what? So it's now time to storyboard. Well, what is storyboarding? Storyboarding or storyboards are illustrations that represent the shots that you will ultimately make up your video. They allow you to visualize your video before doing anything else. Right? So let's break down the parts of a storyboard. A storyboard is typically made up of a series of frames or panels, each containing a rough sketch or illustration of the shot or scene, right? As evidenced by the one left to right, right? Each frame also includes relevant information, notes, or annotations that provide details about that particular shot or scene. All right, storyboards come in a bunch of different styles and shapes, but we're gonna keep things simple today and use the other fun tool that I mentioned, Midjourney. Midjourney works similar to ChatGPT by asking you to input a prompt. It's simply, excuse me, the description of the shot we got from the script, starting with \imagine. In this case, continuing from our previous example, I then typed in imagine a sequential movie storyboard in sequential panels, sketched in pencil, showing a crowded event with people holding disposable cups. Now, feel free to get creative, really, with this, right? Play with the wording, the lighting, description, literally anything you want. The sky is the limit, which is awesome. Okay. So anyway, that's what I typed. And so this is an example of what I came up with, which is great. And it's a great first start for shots and ideas, which is cool. So now if we wanted to go one step further, okay, you could then try and create some actual images to go with your vision, right? So here's an example. Imagine a landfill full of disposable cups. And boom, look at that. So it's not bad for what it came up with, okay? So I encourage you to have fun with it. Really, it doesn't need to be perfect as long as it gets the point across. At this point, regardless of the tool that you decide to use, whether you hand draw it yourself or use something like that, the idea with this process is really just to give your team a visual of what you want before you actually go out and make it. Your first goal should be to create your shot list or storyboard, which will outline all the shots you plan to use for your pitch video. I promise you doing this will save you boatloads of time in the back end. Okay, so you got your script and storyboard in place. Now it's time to put your video together. Luckily, you can obtain quite a few phenomenal stock videos and photos these days to cover the vast majority of your pitch video needs. However, if you want to go out and get actual footage, right, make a note in your storyboard or script which shots you want to shoot yourself versus using stock, right? So just make that note so that you know exactly what you have to do when you go out to do it. With that in mind, the next step in the pre-production process is to plan out the logistics of your shoot. This includes everything from finding locations to securing equipment. When it comes to locations, just try to think about what works best for you and your video's goals, and of course, your budget, right? Especially if there's permitting or anything else that's involved. Regardless of which location you choose, whether it be your house or whatever, just make sure you have permission to actually shoot there. You also need to consider your equipment needs. This includes everything from cameras and lighting equipment to sound equipment and props. Depending on the complexity of your video, you may need to borrow, rent, or purchase various items to suit your needs. Most of you answered what type of equipment you have access to in the survey, which is awesome. At the end of the day, just remember that this is a pitch video and not a Hollywood production. It doesn't need to be perfect. It just needs to get the point across in a clean and professional way. The only tools you actually need are a camera, right? Your smartphone or otherwise, and then a microphone. And ideally, not just the phone built-in one, but you can use that if you need to. Lights in any capacity, whether they're professional photography lights or a ring light, are just bonus, which is great. They're not required, but they will drastically improve the overall quality. Most smartphones have a built-in flashlight, right? Which is nice because it will allow for some creative lighting options, especially if you don't have another light source readily available. In terms of your camera, most modern smartphones can shoot higher quality video than a lot of basic video cameras, which is great. With the right settings, 4K video at 24 FPS, you've got a phenomenal tool in your pocket. As a quick little note, to change your camera on your iPhone, you would just go to your settings, your camera, and then there's a video option, record video option that allows you to change that, right? As you can see on the screen. To quickly expand on that point, let's quickly discuss resolution and what that means. Resolution refers to the number of pixels that make up the image or video on the screen. The more pixels, the higher the resolution. A pixel, if you didn't really know, is the smallest unit of an image that can be represented digitally. It's the tiny dot or square of color that, when combined with other pixels, creates a complete image on screen. The color of a pixel is typically represented by a combination of red, green, and blue, known as RGB, typically. Now in video production, you'll often see 1080p or 4K, right? So 1080p, also known as full HD, has a resolution of 1920 by 1080 pixels. That means there are 1,920 pixels horizontally and 1,080 pixels vertically on screen. Other hand, of course, 4K has resolution of 3840 by 2160, right? There's basically 4 times as many pixels as 1080p, right? It also means at least double the file size, right? But the benefit of shooting in 4K beyond just the obvious quality difference basically means that you have more flexibility in post-production, such as cropping or zooming in on footage without sacrificing the quality overall. The other thing that I mentioned was FPS. So FPS really is frames per second, and it refers to the individual frames or still image that are displayed on 1 second of video. So the higher the FPS, the smoother the motion. Right? Traditional film is usually shot at 24 frames per second, which means that 24 individual pictures or frames are displayed every second. In contrast, most modern video games run at 60 FPS or higher, which gives the player a much smoother and more responsive experience. I personally will recommend that you stick with 24 FPS for your pitch video because it will appear much more visually cinematic if you do that. With all that being said, once you've secured everything, you can begin to plan out the actual shooting schedule. This involves determining which shots or scenes will be filmed when and creating a detailed shooting schedule that outlines the logistics of each day of filming if you have more than one. Overall, even though it's a lot of initial planning, by taking the time to carefully plan out each aspect of your video in the front end, you'll significantly be more prepared to execute your vision. All right, so you've planned out your shoot. Nice. High fives. You've got your locations and storyboard in place. The next step is officially production. It's time to set up your camera and lighting equipment, if you have any, at your chosen locations, right? The ones that you've picked out. But before we do that, let's talk about your camera work. All right, we're going to start with framing your subject using the rule of thirds. The rule of thirds is a tool that allows you to create a balanced image. The rule divides the frame into 3 equal parts or thirds, both horizontally and vertically, resulting in a grid of 9 equal parts. Personally, I suggest you use your phone's grid option when you're using your video. The idea is to line your subject using the horizontal and vertical lines of the grid, ideally on or near intersecting points. It's also important to consider the negative space on or around the subject, as this can also impact the overall balance and composition of the image. When shooting your video, look for patterns, symmetry, and leading lines, as each of these things will naturally draw your viewer's eye and attention, right? As these 2 images, as you can see. Right? Most importantly, try and create depth. You do this by adding layers to your video. Think foreground and background, right? And the best way to accomplish this is to film up against things, simply adding a foreground to your shot. Compare the 2 images in the slide, right? Notice how the blurred plants in front of the right image, along with the blurred background, helps create a sense of depth compared to the white backdrop. In terms of your camera movement, okay, when you actually move the camera, only move deliberately. It's far better to film on a tripod and keep your camera static than to randomly move around for no reason, right? The key is that less is more. Basically, plan out small controlled movements that highlight your subject if you need to, but other than that, don't do anything, right? If you don't know what kind of movements to incorporate, I recommend the following simple camera moves. You can push your camera in toward your subject. You can pull your camera out away from your subject. You can truck basically from right to left or left to right, or you can jib basically up and down, right? Luckily, most smartphones have a built-in stabilizer, so as long as you remain mostly steady, it should come out relatively smooth. And I say mostly by that means don't sprint down the road at like full tilt. Like just try to be as stable as you can. Okay. So you've got all this fun stuff. What about lighting and sound? Okay, let's start with lighting. There are plenty of different lights and lighting techniques out there. However, we're only going to talk about the 3 options that you're most likely to use for your videos. The first is 3-point lighting. And 3-point lighting is most commonly used in interviews. It involves using 3 light sources, a key light, fill light, and a backlight to illuminate the subject, right? As you can see in the diagram. The key light is the main source of light and is positioned at a 45-degree angle to the subject. The fill light is placed on the opposite side of the key light to fill in the shadows, while the backlight is placed behind the subject to add depth and separation from the background. High key lighting is all about creating a cheerful and upbeat mood, often seen in comedies or commercials. To set it up, you need multiple lights to evenly illuminate the subject and background. The key, pun intended, is to avoid casting any harsh shadows. Okay. Low key lighting is all about drama. That's a dramatic setup that is used to create a sense of mystery or danger, often seen in thrillers or horror movies. For low key, you need a single light source, like a spotlight, to create deep shadows and high contrast. Regardless of which setup you choose to use, it's important to consider whether the lighting complements your story and the mood you're trying to convey. All right, now let's get into sound. If nothing else, good audio is arguably the most important thing for any video production when it comes, especially when it comes to your interviews, right? Bad sound often means that that interview clip is literally, or it's entirely unusable. And the reason is you can always throw in B-roll or background or supplementary shots over the top as needed, but it's incredibly difficult to repair broken audio, almost impossible. So that being said, try to avoid using the microphone built into your camera or smartphone. Okay, when it comes to selecting a microphone to use with your smartphone, there are a variety of options depending on your needs and budget. Most microphones also have adapters to plug directly into the headphone port, which is great. I included some links in the additional resources PDF for you to check out regarding mobile audio and microphone options. Okay, if you don't have access to an external microphone, try using the microphone that comes with most headphones, like the Apple AirPods or even the Apple headphones have a microphone to record and using the voice recorder app with that. Okay. If you decide that you don't want to actually capture audio during filming, that's totally okay. Just add voiceover in post or post-production, right? All right, so the two most common types of mics you're probably going to use or you're going to run into are shotgun mics and lav mics or lavalier mics, right? Shotgun, okay. Shotgun mics are basically directional mics. They're designed to capture sound from a very specific direction, right? The goal is to minimize unwanted or background sounds. You often see this type of microphone mounted on the end of a long, lightweight pole called a boom pole, as you see in this image, held by someone, also known as like a boom operator, right, on a mounted stand, or even like mounted, right, static. Okay. Now, something to keep in mind with shotgun is that it's literally from the front, right? So the thing is they're not going to capture audio from the sides. Okay, so make sure when you're using a shotgun mic that it's pointed at your subject's mouth. I have worked on sets where the operator is pointing it for some reason at their ear or their head or somewhere else, and you're not gonna really get much, right? It's very, very specific on how it captures audio. So just be aware of that. A lav mic, right? So a lav mic or lavalier mic is a small mic, often clipped to a person's clothing. It's commonly used in interviews, of course, live events and presentations. The best part about lav mics is they allow for hands-free recording, right? They're also less susceptible to wind noise and other environmental sounds. If you do end up using a lav mic, try to clip it to your subject's clothing as close to their mouth as possible, although do be aware of rustle. Like clothing rustling is a thing, and it is the worst, especially if they have a weird jacket or something. Just be aware of that, especially if they're moving around and you're hearing a lot of that. That happens all the time. So when you're clipping it, just try to do it in a way that's more conspicuous, but at the same time, it's not going to just be, covered up or something like that, right? One last tip before you start recording your subject, record a few seconds of ambient sound in the room. It's called room tone, okay? And this will help you reduce background noise in the editing process, because what it'll allow you to do, there are programs out there that allow you to isolate said room tone, and then you can just literally cut that whole type of sound out, which is great. It's a great way to isolate the audio as needed, okay? Cool. So we have covered quite a bit so far. We'll cap off this section with a quick series of tips and tricks when interviewing people, experts, or fellow community members. Before you film the actual interview, it's important to conduct pre-interviews, okay? Discuss your goals and purpose with the video and answer any questions that they may have, the interviewee, right? Along those same lines, a pre-interview can help set expectations of what to expect during the interview. Try to be, like, this is the time to be as transparent as possible about how the footage will even be used. And of course, always get their permission. That's also a thing, right? You go and you video somebody, and then if you didn't actually get their permission, that's kind of a bummer. So make sure you do that. All right. Try and ask open-ended questions, to encourage your subject to share their personal stories and experiences, right? Try to avoid leading questions that can influence their response. A really good tip, actually, if you're working with someone who has little to no camera experience, is to sit or stand slightly beside, left or right, the camera, right? It's a great way to show to make the interview flow a lot more naturally, because the interviewee will then look into your eyes as opposed to the very intimidating camera lens, which is, depending on how big your camera is, it can be very intimidating. Basically now, once you're confident really with your setup, and you've hopefully done some test shots, you can basically at this point finally start recording, right? Now, one thing to note, and this is like pro tip, is try to capture plenty of footage. Just go if you have to, go a little over the top, right? Just because you want to give yourself plenty of options during the editing process, right? You don't want to be in a position where you don't have enough to work with, right? So don't be afraid to take multiple takes of each shot, especially from different angles or distances, right? So you're like, oh, that would work better or not, right? Type of thing. Okay. All right. So we've collected our video, which is awesome. We're out. We've shot. We've written the script. We've done like a lot up to this point, right? So now it's finally time to start editing your actual video, right? So we've officially entered post-production. Hooray! Right? now where do you start? Where do we go? What do we do? Right? So let's do a quick introduction to the world of NLEs. Okay. So NLE, or non-linear editing, is the basis of all video editing software that you see today, like iMovie, Final Cut, Adobe Premiere, Avid, DaVinci, whatever. Okay. It's all about being able to work with your video clips out of order before adding special effects, transitions, audio, whatever. Okay. Every editing platform is a little different from the rest, but most all of them have the same basic components. Okay, so for today's example on the slides, you're going to see I'm going to use Descript because it's super easy to use, especially because we're focusing this workshop on beginners. But again, this will translate across everything from Premiere to the rest. Okay. So regardless of which platform you choose, the first thing you're always going to see is the timeline, right? And this is where the magic happens. This is where it all comes together. This is where you arrange and edit your video and audio clips. You can cut, you can trim, you can move them around, and of course you can add transitions and effects. Media browser, right? Or the project panel, right? As it's sometimes called. This is where you can import and subsequently view all your assets, okay? Including your recently shot audio, hopefully recently shot audio and video, image files, or even stock footage, okay? You have your viewer. This is where you can view your clips and make adjustments to their properties, like such as color. You have your audio mixer, where you can adjust your audio levels of your individual audio tracks. And then finally, you have your settings, your export settings, right? This is where you can adjust the settings for your final video export, where you can choose the format, the resolution, and the frame rate, okay? Unfortunately, due to time limitations today, I'm not going to go over all the specifics on exactly how to use Descript, but I will go over some of the basics and highlight why I think it's a phenomenal tool for anyone new to video editing. I'm also on a Mac, so keep that in mind if you're using Windows, as things might look slightly different for you. So that being said, the first step, regardless of which editing platform you decide or choose to use, it basically you have to import your video footage, right? That's the very first step, okay? If you're using a mobile editing app, you can actually import directly from your phone, which is really nice. But when you first open your program and create a new project, you have to start by importing your footage from wherever you have it stored on your computer. And in my case, it's in my downloads folder. Hooray. That being said, I do often recommend that you store all your footage in an external hard drive, because most video footage, especially if it's in 4K, is extremely large and will destroy your space. Well, not really destroy, but it will take up all your space. Okay. Another place you can keep it is in the cloud, like Google Drive, but just be aware that accessing your footage in the cloud is then dependent on your internet connection, right? So then you're kind of at the mercy of your speed or Wi-Fi. Something I also recommend, basically around this point, is to just organize all your footage into folders as much as you can. Be as organized. The more organized you are, the better, honestly, especially in the editing process. So I would recommend you organize them into folders or bins, as they're called in Premiere Pro, based on subject or location, as it will make it significantly easier to find and manage the shots that you need. Okay. Here's an example from an image or example image from a project that I have in like Premiere Pro. So you can kind of see I just went through and I have everything organized like SFX or sound effects. I have my music, I have my graphics, different pieces. So things are going in different folders. Okay, so I know exactly what goes in that folder and when and why. All right. At this point, Descript will start transcribing your video footage. It'll ask you to identify how many people are speaking in your clip, and if you're not sure, you just mark as such, okay? And it will analyze that. Once it's done importing, you'll be greeted with your video and the text version of the audio in the upper left, okay, which is super awesome. Right? It'll come through crazy fast. And what's great is because Descript predominantly runs with an AI engine, it'll be able to predominantly be very, very accurate. Obviously, everything's not going to be perfect, but what the great part about Descript is that you can then now you have basically a transcription of your whole movie right there in text form, which is really cool. So here's why I suggest the beginners use Descript over other particular platforms. And it's because it's the ability to edit simply from the text itself. Meaning that if you delete a word or words, that portion of the video is cut. So here's an example. Watch, check this out. Like I highlighted all around the globe, and then I deleted that, and then the actual video portion went away as well, right? So it took away that. So it's really nice because now I can just delete the actual text, and I don't even have to tinker with the timeline at all if I really didn't want to, which is nice. Okay, so basically it's that simple. You think of it like editing a text document. It's far simpler to edit and change words than to cut up a timeline, right? Or at least conceptually, it's simpler. So to boil it down to the basics, editing really is nothing more than piecing together your story from all the components you've acquired up till this point, right? So think of it this way: your script is the blueprint. Uh-oh. Am I frozen? Oh, no, there we go. Your script is the blueprint, and it's your job to build it. With all that being said, let's talk about some tips and tricks to get you started. So I highly recommend pre-watching and sorting your clips accordingly. What I mean by this is for you and your team to go through all the footage you've collected and decide what you want to use. Don't be afraid to delete or throw away anything that doesn't help move your story or pitch video forward. Like I said, it all comes back to the script. That's why it's so darned important to plan as thoroughly as you can on the front end. The more you can plan in the pre-production process, it'll save you so much time in the post and back end, right? There's an old adage, fix it in post, and that is the worst. Like whoever made that up needs to just like curl up into a ball somewhere, because it's truly not a reasonable or feasible thing. Like the more that you can plan ahead of time and like you can try to fix those errors ahead of time, it'll save you so much time on this back end. So basically one of the best time-saving tips that I can possibly give you is to make notes, either during filming or during your initial pre-screening, as to the various sound bites or clips that you find especially helpful for telling your story, right? Often you'll have like an hour long, potentially I've even had an 8-hour long interview, right? You've had that sometimes you only use like 20 seconds of actual footage, right? It's a lot of things to go through, right? So your notes should mark the exact time when the soundbite or quote occurs, and a quick highlight of what was said for later review. That way, when you're on the cutting room floor or just basically in the middle of editing, you'll be able to immediately jump to that point in the interview and then just delete all the rest. Right? Saves you a ton of time. As a quick aside, the term cutting room floor is actually a holdover from the days when movies were actually edited on celluloid, right? Editors would physically cut up the film, and that's why it was called the cutting room floor. Right? Funny enough. Okay, so here is what's I don't know. It's okay. What's happening?
We can see it.
Can you see it?
You are blurry, but we can see your screen.
Oh, I was like, okay, yeah, like my camera went away. Yeah. Am I back? Yeah, okay, there we go. Yeah, that was weird. I noticed I went blurry for a second there. Okay. So here's an example Google Sheet I created for a documentary that I shot a few years ago. As you can see, I broke down the type of clip, whether it was solutions-based or a negative commentary, the name of the interviewer, the name of the file, the category of the clip, like if it was agriculture or something else, the time in which the quote occurs, and the quote itself, right? So, and as you can see, it's also color-coded, right? So I went through and created this very detailed sheet because I wanted to really thoroughly organize. We had a ton of different clips from different sources. We had multiple cameras and this whole thing, whether from drone footage and from, you know, secondary cameras, whatever. And so sorting through all that was a lot. So that's where something like this makes it is so essential to the organization process, because again, you need to know what the heck you're putting together really at the end of the day. So at this point, this is what I would suggest. Okay, just start editing. Okay, don't overthink it. Okay, begin by arranging your footage in the order you want it to appear in your pitch video based on your script and storyboard. You can then start trimming and cutting your footage to fit your message. Each program will have a different feature, but the most common tool is the blade tool, you know, for literally slicing the clip at that very specific mark. Okay. So once you're happy with the initial edit, think about adding transitions. You know, keep it simple. You know, things like fade ins, fade outs, crossfades, whatever. I would highly recommend sticking away from a lot of the really fancy 3D flip shenanigans, because not only does that slow your video down, it tends to, in my opinion, really reduce a lot of the professionalism. I think it looks very cheesy most of the time. I mean, some of them can be pulled off, but very, very rarely. So try to stick away from some of the fancier transitions unless you really feel like it's necessary. At the end of the day, just like anything else, less is more, right? Because you really want to you don't want to distract viewers or your audience from your story, especially with very over-the-top transitions. If you want to get fancy, if that is your goal, then you can add text overlays, visual effects or VFX or graphics, right, to enhance your video, especially for those. I know there's a few of you who are planning potentially an entirely animated pitch video. This is where programs like Adobe's After Effects comes in. Luckily, Descript has a bunch of built-in ready-made templates, right, which is super awesome, that will greatly help in this process. If you do want to go the After Effects route, it is a much more robust program than we have time to go over. That being said, one thing I will most definitely mention is to use templates when first starting out. It saved me boatloads of time when first learning the program. Okay, with this in mind, I highly recommend you check out videohive.net for thousands and thousands of templates and ready-made assets for you to use. Okay, it has, you know, logo intros, general animations, you know, and every single one of them comes with their own tutorial and instructions on how to use it and customize it for your needs, which is awesome. Okay, and then I mean, seriously, like a lot of these are so amazingly detailed, and you get everything from like really, really detailed, like movie style intros to whatever, right? Which is great. Okay. So here's an example, like if I was like just some options. This is, I just like looked, if I wanted the fire logo, for example, and I mean, this is just literally a small snapshot of like, there was like pages and pages and pages of potential fire logos, which is super cool. But I mean, it's like, oh, I wanted my thing to come in and burn from the below or whatever. You know what I mean? It doesn't matter. Like there are tons of options out there for this. And so I genuinely recommend checking it out. And it's a really fun tool to start with, especially if you're interested in After Effects to any capacity. It's a great way because a lot of these are pre-built and will save you a ton of time. Okay. All right. So this is a great, it's also the point where I'm going to quickly mention another great AI tool, which is Steve.ai. It's a great option for quickly creating animated explainer or infographic type videos, right? Basically, it'll effectively turn your script into a ready-made video. What's really neat about Steve, the Steve AI, platform, it really is like paste your script here, and then it will basically kick you out a video from that, right? Now, obviously, there are customization options with that, but it's very much ChatGPT-esque in the sense that it's kind of like, here's my thing, and here you go type of deal. But what's great is it allows you to then create, again, you can create entirely all these animated or infographic explainer type videos, right? Again, with no animation or editing type, experience involved, and it allows you to do that and customize that to your needs. So again, from a standpoint of if you wanted to kind of avoid the complexity of After Effects and still wanted to kind of create that animation video, this is a great tool and option for you. All right, cool. So let's quickly talk about using stock photos or footage. These awesome resources can save you significant amounts of time compared to shooting the footage yourself. Stock footage can be a great way of obtaining B-roll or secondary shots that enhance your story, right? Without ever having to go and hire a crew, rent equipment, travel to specific locations, whatever, right? So you can see, like, I mean, I'm able to go fly a plane or go to the Alps or go to the beach or whatever, right? Go to a wedding, which is amazing. So I included a bunch of links in the additional resources PDF, but basically my personal favorites are Unsplash and Pexels. Unsplash for photos and Pexels for kind of photos, videos. Both are phenomenal from a free resource, and they both have a ton of options just out the gate, which is really nice, especially because that way you don't have to necessarily worry as much about all the licensing potential concerns when it comes to using stock footage, which we'll get into in a second. But that's something just to keep in mind when you are using stock footage. And there are definitely sites like Getty Images and iStock, which, I mean, they'll charge you like a pretty penny. Everything like a couple hundred to a couple thousand per video, which is nuts. So just keep that in mind. But there are a bunch of sources, and I'm providing some free link. I provided all the links in the PDF that'll go with this after.
Hey, Corbin, can you repeat? You said Unsplash, and what was the second thing you said?
Oh, Pexels, sorry.
Pexels,
P-E-X-E-L-S. Yeah, Pexels.com. That's the other one, sorry.
And those are all already up on the curriculum page
Oh,
for
they are
this
there.
workshop.
Even better.
So I
Excellent.
went ahead and took care of that. So if
Oh,
folks
excellent.
are wanting to open up that page now, follow along, they can do that.
Excellent. Yeah. That's so we can, yeah. If you wanted to check out Unsplash Pexels while we're talking, that's where I recommend you go. So again, both resources are incredibly robust from a standpoint of just like, again, tons and tons of options of free options. Obviously, if you wanted to go for a paid stock site, there are plenty of options there as well. But it's a great way, especially if you need a free resource and you want to keep your budget down and low, which I know some of you indicated your budget for your videos was, not on the higher end. So I'd say, like, keep that in mind. A bunch of free resources available for you. So then again, I'm going to provide some extra links as well in the PDF after the fact. Okay. All right. So let's talk about licensing briefly, because of course, when it comes to stock footage or stock video in any capacity, you have to make sure that you have the proper license to use that thing, right? Which is, to be the case. Depending on the source, most media comes, with a license that outlines the permitted use. I know with Unsplash and even Pexels, some of them, it depends on the video. It depends sometimes from the thing, but most of the time it'll say like, there'll be like an attribution in the form of a photo, video, or credit. Now, potentially you could do that at the very end where it's like, pictures or video by, in the thing, right? Especially if you have credits, or you can just like make a note of that. So, type of thing, just to be aware of, because sometimes when you're sharing it, especially if you post it on like YouTube or wherever you're going to post your pitch videos, that's something to keep in mind, because, the platform that you post it to will sometimes ask, do you have all the licensing for this stuff? And YouTube, of course, is very good about catching copywritten stuff, and so that's something also to be aware of. But that's where, again, both you're going to very low probability as if zero, because with both Pexels and Unsplash, they people who post there know that people are going to use their stuff for free, right? This is kind of the idea. All right. So at this point, you should be ready to add music, hopefully, at this point, right? So unless you have a composer buddy, you're probably going to want to use a pre-made soundtrack. There are quite a few options out there, but the first place I highly recommend you check out is audiojungle.net. I mean, it's honestly, it's the companion site to VideoHive, right? So it's again which for After Effects. So Audio Jungle is phenomenal, again, just like VideoHive, in the sense that it's got a vast range of royalty-free music that will allow you to add any track without ever having to worry about copyright or licensing issues. And if you're familiar with the concept of royalty-free, just to quickly clarify, royalty-free, usually when you have an intellectual property with royalties, it means you have to basically pay that person regularly. So with royalty-free, you can just use it once you've paid it for it once, and then there's no royalties paid back to that artist. Right, so that's something to keep in mind, so that from a standpoint of that's how the all the big composers make all their money, is with the royalties, right? It's those continual checks. So a royalty-free piece of music, again, allows you to use it after you get that initial purchase, right? Now there are free sites as well, which we'll get into, but this is the first place I recommend you check out, because they have tons of options and it's super cheap by comparison. Like, I mean, again, like it even says on the thing, like you can get things for as cheap as low as like $1, right? Which is great. The other place you can go, of course, is YouTube's built-in music library. They have a ton of free music and even sound effects you can just download. Again, no copyright issues there, because again, they produce an obscene amount that you can just use for all of their stuff, which is great. So it's a great free resource from a standpoint of extra things to download. Okay. And at this point, I'm also going to mention another fancy kind of AI tool, which is called sounddraw.io, and it's an AI music generator. It'll basically allow you to customize your own unique music without ever having to hire a composer or musician, which is so sweet. So basically what's really nice is it allow you to basically so if you want it to be a little bit more custom, then maybe like the Audio Jungle or even YouTube, you could kind of go this potential route, and you have like something that's a little bit fits your script and your pitch video a little bit more thoroughly, again for again a fraction of the price, right, by comparison. So something to think about. Okay, so you've got your video mostly edited, you've got your footage and your music in place. Really, at this point, you're almost to the end, which is awesome. That being said, let's get into one piece that's pretty much the staple of a pitch video, which is the voiceover. That doesn't mean you have to do a voiceover, okay? On the contrary, you could just stitch your together all your various interviews, which if you have multiple interviews, you could just use those to tell your cohesive story, right? This is often done in documentaries, right? You just have multiple interviews and you cut various pieces together to tell that story instead of having a voiceover, right? It's totally fine. But if you do end up wanting to do a voiceover, let's talk about that. Okay, so first and foremost, keep it simple. I'm going to assume that you've included your voiceover in your script, because like I said, back to the script, make sure that you have this all planned out by the time we get to this point. You should already know what you have to say. That being said, keep it concise and to the point, right? It's easy to like write like a paragraph long voiceover, and that's way too much, right? So just try to lessen that, a couple sentences tops, but really try to keep it as concise as you can, especially from a video perspective, okay? Because with video, it's a visual medium, right, more than anything else. Okay, most programs allow you to record your voiceover directly onto that platform, which is awesome. Descript, as our example shows, has a very handy record option where you can choose to record audio only. You can include your camera, like your webcam, or you can record your screen if you wanted to share something onto your computer, if you have like a program or something you wanted to share on your computer. Here are a couple of tips before, during, and after recording, okay? I know this may seem wildly obvious, but seriously, before you record, practice reading your script out loud, okay? Like this will help you become more comfortable with the words and identify any areas where you may stumble or need revisions, okay? It's so easy to like write out your script and then you're like, oh, I'm good. And then by the time you get to the recording process, you click record and you're like, oh, and you stumble and the words might not sound right, whatever. Like, honestly, like before you even get there, really just read it out loud and see how it sounds, you know, and then go from there, right? It'll save you a ton of time. The next thing is find a quiet space. I know, again, it's not as obvious as these sound, but literally, like, sometimes I've was working with an audio person that would just for some reason was doing it out in anyway. Point being is that before recording your voiceover, try and find a quiet space, such as your bedroom or your office, where you won't be interrupted by any background noise or children or whatever, right? Like we talked about in the production section, hopefully you at this, you know, you've been able to acquire, borrow, rent, you know, a decent microphone, right? I highly recommend a USB mic, right? Like a Blue Yeti as an example, because they can be easily connected to your computer or mobile device, right? There's a ton of adapters out there. They'll just plug directly into your headphone port, which is awesome. If you don't have a microphone or access to one, you can still use your phone. You could just use the voice memos on the iPhone or the Smart Recorder Android app to record your audio. If you do decide to do this, just remember, try to hold your phone as close to your mouth as possible to ensure that your voice is captured clearly. For those who don't want to or aren't able to record their own voice, I know I'm personally not a fan of hearing my own voice. You've got options, okay? I highly recommend you check out 11 Labs or Murph.ai, because both are voiceover tools which will allow you to create a highly realistic and professional sounding voiceover using AI tech, right? It's a great way to produce professional sounding voiceovers, especially if you don't have access to a decent microphone, right? What's really cool, I believe 11 Labs, more so than Murph, allows you to change the accent, right? So you can like have a British man or Australian woman, you know, give your voiceover depending on what you want, okay? Which is really cool. So really, at the end of the day, just remember to speak clearly and slowly, and do your best to vary your inflection and tone to keep your audience engaged, right? If you were speaking flat the whole time, it would really be boring, right? So just make sure to up and down if you can. Otherwise, it's, you know, again, it's boring to listen to. All right. Oh goodness. Oh, well. That's neat. Okay, cool. So at this point, you've completed your pitch video. Congrats! How does it feel? Well, you're technically not done yet. There are a few final touches to note before you share it with the world. The first is color grading, which is all about adjusting the colors in your video to give it a specific look and feel. This is different from, but often confused with, color correction. Okay, color correction is about fixing problems, while color grading is about creating a specific style. Basically, you always want to color correct an image first, where you adjust the colors, the exposure, right, how bright it is, to making it look more natural and balanced. The goal is to fix any issues with the original footage and make it look as good as possible. Color grading, by contrast, right, involves making certain colors more vibrant or muted, adding tints or filters, and adjusting the overall color palette as a whole. The goal of color grading is to enhance the storytelling and visual impact of your video. Most editing programs have the basic color tool built in, like Lumetri Color, which is in like Premiere Pro. So experience with what works best for you and the software that you're using. Descript has a simple color adjustments effect that will allow you to adjust everything from exposure, of course, how bright or dark it is, temperature, how warm or cold, red or blue, that kind of thing, saturation, etc. Audio adjustments. Something else to note is to make sure that your audio is balanced. In other words, making sure that no one element overpowers the other, like the music being too loud. You want to make sure that the audio remains consistent throughout so that viewers don't have to adjust their volume in order to watch your video. Right? The most important thing is for your dialogue and voiceover to remain audible, so check whether it's too loud or soft. Right? It's so easy to like have your music way too loud or your audio way too quiet. I mean, how often do you watch sometimes like an old movie and you're like, and you have to turn down the music really quick or turn back up the music, right? Or turn back, you know, their speakers, and that happens because of like bad mixing with that, right? And so just be aware of that when you're going through your edit, is be aware of the balance of your audio. And most editors have a decibel feature, usually like with your audio, that'll track where your audio is, and just being aware of trying to keep that levels consistent, right? So usually a good rule of thumb is like -6 dB or decibels is like a good start. You never really want to be at 0 like ever. And the reason is because 0 and above is like you're just going to blow out your speaker, right? It's going to be, that's where you're going to hear like where you get the blown out audio sound. You want to be below, always below in the negatives as much as you can, right? So really like -6 and below is a good place to hang out, right? But I mean, if you're too quiet, like -15 or 20, like usually music is around -20-ish, okay? And then dialogue and voiceover is usually like up at like -10 to 6, somewhere in there, okay? So just be aware of those levels when you're balancing your audio, okay? In Descript, you can adjust your audio levels measured in, of course, dB or decibels, like I was saying, in the audio tab, right? There's a nice little tab that you can just, a little slider that you can just go left or right, which is great. Before your final export, as you adjust your volume levels, you may want to remove any background noise or unwanted sounds you might have picked up during filming. Descript, another little plug here, has an awesome feature called Studio Sound, right? Which is basically it's an AI enhanced feature that it'll just go through and scrub a lot of the sounds for you, which is neat. I'll tell you. Again, it's a thing that'll just save you a ton of time. You just like have it do its thing, and then wow, this sounds really professional. And I spent all of 10 seconds, you know, clicking the button, right? It's great. So now let's quickly talk about subtitles and captions. These are an important part of the export process, as they will help make your video more accessible. Luckily, Descript makes it super easy to export your SRT or subtitle file because it's text-based, right? It's a text-based software, which is really, really nice, okay? The biggest difference with captions and subtitles is that captions are often burned or permanently embedded into the video during the export process, right? I generally don't recommend this option because they cannot be turned off once they're, it's exported as such. It's just built into the video. Subtitles, on the other hand, of course, allow for translation into another language, right, by comparison. As a quick note, if you want your subtitles or captions in a different language, I highly recommend you use rev.com, as they will not only transcribe your video, but they will also provide you with accurate translated SRT files for you to use. So they will accurately transcribe it to Spanish, German, Korean, whatever. Yeah, make your choice, and wherever you want it to go, like they will do that, which is really great. And it's not super expensive. It's like a couple bucks or whatever it is, per minute or something. It's not too bad. When you're uploading your video to various platforms, so this is an example with YouTube. There's always usually an option to add your SRT or subtitle file, which will then sync to your video, right? And luckily, again, with like Descript's export, usually when you have an SRT file, it'll have timing in there, which is really nice. So it basically just like instant on your thing. And that's why when you press the CC button on YouTube, and then a lot of those subtitles are, sometimes they're accurate and sometimes they're not. And if they're not, it's because they didn't have a proper subtitle file. All right, so hooray, right? It's finally time to export your video. At this point, right, you want to make sure that you have the correct format, like we talked about, okay, and resolution, depending on where the video is going, all that stuff, okay? As I mentioned in the previous section, the most common resolutions are 720p, 1080p, and 4K. If you're uploading your video to YouTube, I do highly recommend a minimum of 1080p. But if you're sharing, to like other social media sites, potentially like Instagram or the rest, you don't necessarily need that high. You could go with like 720 or less, just because again, it's on a very small screen, right? You don't necessarily need a 4K image necessarily on on a mobile phone, right? As I mentioned in Descript, it's for exporting, it's super easy, right? It's just literally as easy as going clicking publish and choosing export video. In this example, of course, the current timeline or the composition, right, is set to 1080p, right? But I wanted to export it at 4K, right? That's why the little check mark there is on 4K, but the composition is on 1080p. So that's something to keep in mind. And so it's built to do as such. So you can just you can adjust where you want it to go. So here's some quick common formats to keep in mind, especially if you're working with different programs. Some of them won't even deal with it, but just keep this in mind. So there are a variety of formats out there, but the most common is .mp4, which is the most widely accepted format across various platforms, social media, whatever. But when you're exporting your video, I highly encourage you to make sure it's .mp4, right, which is a MPEG-4. I mean, over .move, which is QuickTime or Apple, or .avi, which is Windows, right? And the issue with .move or .avi is, again, they are platform specific. So .move generally only works on Mac, and .avi generally only works on Windows. And so it becomes a little dicey, especially when trying to share, or especially when you're trying to upload your stuff. So I recommend, you want something that's a little bit more translatable across all devices and platforms. Right, so just be aware of that. All right, so last, but certainly not least, as silly as it sounds, test your video. So it's exported, right? Watch the dang thing and make sure it works before you share it, right? It's more often than not, you're likely to catch an error in this, kind of quick viewing that you didn't maybe catch during the edit. You're oh crap, this thing, whatever it is, quickly watch it, make sure you caught it before you actually finally upload or share it, right? Okay. Congrats, you made it to the end of this this long-winded presentation. So pat yourselves on the back, as that was a lot of info, right? It was a lot of stuff. So let's do a quick review. Hopefully at this point you should now have a solid understanding of the storytelling process, the tools that you can use, how to shoot and edit your video, create voiceover, add music, and finally exporting formats and resolutions. Really at the end of the day, just take your time, experiment with different techniques, and really don't be afraid to ask for help, right? And I'm actually here to do that, right? So this is the best part. And I've spoken to a few of you on email, but yeah, anyway. But this really, just remember that it's all about telling your story and sharing your vision. So really, that's what it is. So thank you guys for being and listening to my awesome little presentation. So there you go. Time for Q&A stuff. Yay. I don't know. We want to talk about it. We can have Q&A. I don't know. Seems like a reasonable time to do it.
I do have a question.
Talk to me.
So I've got some video recording done. It was on my DSLR, but I didn't have a tripod at the time, so it's a little shaky. Is there can I stabilize after I record video? Does Premiere
You can
Pro?
totally stabilize. Yeah, there are plenty. There are stabilizing software. I mean, the best place to stabilize, it depends. What program are you using, Pierce?
Probably Premiere Pro.
Premiere. Okay, nice.
Yeah.
So Premiere actually, I believe it has, in the latest update, they probably they have a stabilizer, but the other one you can use is in After Effects as well. They have a really nice, it's an auto stabilizer feature, which is really nice, right? And the latest version of Premiere has a stabilizer, which I know, and so yeah, the answer is it's definitely fixable, which is great, right?
Okay.
I mean, it's not the do you remember what size you record? Did you record in 4K, or what kind of size did you record in? Do you remember?
I have no. I would just. I have a full frame DSLR.
Okay. Oh, great. Okay, that's then yeah. You should be fine because when it comes to stabilizing, right, it crops the image, right? So that's why I'm just asking, because if you shot in a lower res, it will look really blurry when it does. But if you shot in a full frame DSLR, then because it's gonna have to crop the image in order to stabilize the stuff. You know what I mean? Okay. So just be aware of that. You're gonna lose a little bit on your edges when the stabilization, right? But luckily, if it's not crazy janky, I don't know how how crazy janky it is, but if I mean,
I haven't looked over too much, but I don't think it's crazy.
like
I think it's more
mean,
shaky than like.
right. Then for the most part, you can fix it without necessarily losing it too much on the top or bottom, right?
Okay.
So be aware of that, like in terms of, and you can also adjust like where you want it to do. Like sometimes I've manually gone in and then like, you know, had like stabilized, you know, manually type of thing.
Mhm.
You can do that, but I wouldn't necessarily recommend it. I mean, a lot of times the auto stabilizer is significantly better to do, you know what I mean?
Okay.
So yeah.
Hey, Corbin, I've got a question on the cost of Descript in terms of what would be useful for the team. So it's free
Yeah.
for 1 hour of transcription. It's $12 a month for 10 hours of transcription. So
Mhm.
since these are 1 to 3 minute videos, would that 10 hours of transcription
Oh,
be adequate?
yeah, that's totally fine. It's again, that's also one of the reasons I recommended Descript is because it has a free option, which is awesome. But yeah, like it's not, I mean, because they're not, especially because this is such a short video, you know, for requirements, like it's that option you just said, Heather, is perfect because
Okay.
it's not like, unless for some reason it's like you're just uploading a stupid amount of footage, like, but for the most part, and again, that's kind of back to my point about like pre-watching your clips and pre-screening what you're going through, because that makes a huge difference, just in general, because like that way you're not uploading like everything possible, right? And it makes a big difference, like you said, especially when you said 10 hours, right? So yeah, that's totally fine.
10 hours for $12.
Yep, there you go. So it's great. Honestly, because I mean, and more than anything, I couldn't say this enough. Like when I first came across it as an editing platform, I was reticent because I'm coming from Final Cut or Premiere, like in that area, but at the same time, because you can just like literally cut your text and it cuts it for you, it's absurd. Like, because you can just like, you don't even have to look at the timeline. You can just hang out and just like read the words, and you're like, oh, that doesn't sound right, or I'm gonna move that up here. The goof, like, I mean, it's like I said, it's like effectively like you're being your you know, a proofreader, right, for your own stuff. But again, it's a great way to from an editing perspective, because I feel like editors can look very intimidating from a video editing you know, right? They're like, oh, what there's a lot of stuff, and you know, what am I doing? And honestly, like when you just upload, you're like, I can just cut this out and I can move this around. And it has a thing too where like it has an AI feature where it'll analyze the voice of the speaker, and then if you can type in a word, it'll then try to fill that in with that word that you want, which is neat. Like, I know, like you're like, oh, I want him to say this instead, like whatever, and you can
Wait, do
get it
their
to,
lips move in a new way then?
no, but it's like for the most, like,
But it's only one word, so I guess.
it's like, if like, I mean, it's not like you're I mean, that's next level, right? But I mean, from a standpoint of like, I mean, especially because there are definitely times, and there's also an auto feature which will allow you to like remove ums and uhs and all the spaces automatically. Like you can just say like remove ums, and it already knows, and it'll cut all the ums right away. Like it's just amazing, and especially because in interviews, I mean, how often do people like there's spaces and there's like long gaps between answers, right? And that's annoying to have to go and like find and like cut and slice whatever, and it does that for you. It literally, like, you can even set the length of the space between each word or each sentence. So you're like, oh, I think I want to leave 2 seconds between this answer or something, right? It's so, I mean, from a standpoint of like, especially this time, you know, I think the style of video that's going to be best for these pitch videos, like it's great.
Perfect.
It really is.
So I have more questions, but does anyone else have questions? Because I don't want to, the students should ask questions. I wish I could make a video now.
Yeah, I know, right? Well, I mean, it's it's fun to play with as a platform
Does
separately,
sound like fun.
because
Okay, animation. So on the animation AI ones, if a team wants to do an animation, and can they select like whether it's going to be a teddy bear or it's going to be a stick figure, in that, do they have those choices? And then so if they just basically write a concept, they could have the AI write the script, and then they could just go to the animation thing and say, make this an animation, and then they could edit it to be what they want. Is that what I'm hearing? Okay.
Yeah. So what's really
Kind of
neat about
amazing.
like, I mean, some of the AI stuff out there is straight amazing. Like, it's the coolest thing, and that's why it's like you could literally, if you wanted to, go to ChatGPT, have them write a script, go to Steve AI, and effectively in all of, I mean, a few minutes, have a full video, right? You could do that. I wouldn't necessarily recommend it because again, it's not, I don't think it's perfect yet. I think there's definitely a lot of room for improvement, but Steve does give you a ton. So what's nice is that you go in, and again, in the additional resources PDF, I'll like provide like some like tutorials on Steve specifically, because like there's just like going in and like, you know, pasting your script, and there's like, what happens is there's like, it breaks it up into scenes. So you would basically paste your script, and you want, you know, each scene is a different frame of the animation, right? And you kind of like set it how you want, and then you can like choose, you can like then choose what kind of like, you know, you want your, you know, like you said, a bear or a person about, you know, holding the globe or whatever, you know what I mean? You can do all that, which is really nice, and then you can then customize it based on those things. And of course, if you're like, oh, that animation doesn't look very good, and then you can actually click on the thing, whatever it is, you know, the asset, and you can go in and then have a huge library of things you can replace it with. You're like, oh, instead of a bear, I want a, you know, I want an alligator or something, you know, which is crazy. So I mean, it operates on twofold. It kind of has like it has like a template structure, right? But at the same time, like, it allows you to customize it pretty, you know, thoroughly, considering that it's like, you know, basically making it an animated video for, you know, for very low effort, which is great. So I know some of the tools are straight crazy. Like I said, that one, and like I said, the sound draw, which I haven't played too much with yet, but I did come across it recently. It was like one of those things that you know, was something I think it'd be worth playing with from a standpoint of especially creating custom music, you know. Are there any other questions or comments, concerns? You know,
Let's go make some video.
yeah. Yeah, like this, like, whoo, we're making some video. Yeah, right. That's right. But yeah, I think really at this point it's like I said, like my biggest, I try to like cover a vast array of stuff, but like I said, more than anything, it's there's so many of these really cool tools now, like everything from like a fancy 4K phone in our literally, or a 4K camera in our pocket, right? To, you know, AI screenwriting software that there's so much you can do now. You can basically do what would have required a whole crew of people how many years ago, right, to do, which is nice. And with very low like barrier to entry, which is really nice as well. So I think it's, especially because, you know, if you have to share your screen or you have to go out, like, and really what it comes down, it's like part of it is just like have fun with it as much as like, you know, as anything else, especially with like, and that's why I try to stress the pre-production process is stupidly important, like more so than anything else. Like if you take the time to really plan it, that's why I was encouraged, like the storyboard section, the more you can storyboard, like the more you can just really break it out and really get an idea. Okay, I really want this frame, I want, or this is what I want it to look like. Honestly, if you even have stick figures, it doesn't matter. The point being is that because then you just know ahead of time, like, okay, and you're like, maybe this shot I want to actually take from stock footage. I want a flying plane to do this thing, right? So you can kind of like know wildly ahead of time, right? And it's such a huge time saver, because then when you get to the editor, as you saw, then it's just, all it is just like literally you've got your map of that you've already created, and all you have to do is just like, all right, just like kind of almost like a drag and drop, right? And just move around. So, I mean, I mean, I'm telling you, it makes a huge difference. I know from experience. I've gone the back end where I was like, oh, it's fine, run and gun, shoot, you know, whatever. And then yeah, yeah, like Greg is nodding. Like it's a thing where you go out and you're like, oh yeah, and then you get into the post, and then it's like, yeah, it's and then you're like, this is the worst decision, and now I have to sort through all this stuff. It's scrub potentially hours of footage. Yeah, it's.
Hey Corbin, there's a question in the chat about a microphone.
That
There's
I didn't
two
even look at
questions. One's about the lav one, and one's about people moving around.
Okay, let me back up the chat. Oh yeah. So lav mics. Oh yeah. Lab mic recommendations. Is that the question from Smitty? Yes. Okay. Cool. I will send that in the PDF. I'll give you the specifics, but I mean, there's a couple different options. I personally recommend Sennheiser. They have a really good mic option, and it's like there's actually a wireless version, which is even neater. I mean, in the sense that it's like it doesn't have to. There's no wire for the clip, which is really nice. Like, yeah, I know Craig's like, what? Like it's a thing. Like there's like a wireless version of the thing, which is nice. But again, it's, I mean, there's a ton of, it just depends on your budget, part of it too, right? And that's why it's like,
where can people get these either for free or for rental, like a really cheap rental?
yeah, so like the best place to rent in Seattle is Glazers.
And is it pretty cheap to rent?
They're I mean, especially for like a single day, like yeah, like they're not too bad. Like it's like, I mean, maybe like depending on what you're renting, like you know, I would think probably as low as $10, as much as like $100, depending on what you're doing. You know, you're never going to spend more than that. Especially if you're just doing audio equipment, right? The most expensive stuff there is usually their camera gear, but like you can get audio for really, I mean, I've rented from Glazers for so long. I just remember them being like a great, like, you know, anyway, in terms of rentals. But in terms of like, you can get things like through, like, for example, like Amazon. I mean, again, I'll send you some, I'll put it in the PDF after the fact, but like, there's like mics, like USB mics you can like plug into your phone for like $20, right?
And and so Spokane Library has some stuff if you are near Spokane, and then some universities will have free stuff.
Yeah, well, that's a
if
good
you're at
point.
the university, you
yeah.
can get it for free, probably.
Heather actually is a phenomenal point. Yeah, I'm trying to think of like, you know, so like if you don't have any resources like the library, I guess like the university, which does have, you know, a ton of, you know, stuff you can rent for free. But yeah, that's what I say. But I'd say like if you're a normal human who doesn't have access to that, then you know, I'm thinking like, you know, $20, you know, you can get relatively low, especially if you're gonna purchase. But I personally recommend, especially for a pitch video, unless you plan on doing a lot more shooting, to rent over buying, just unless you think you're going to use it a lot, right? I've fallen into that trap where I just like buy a bunch of stuff and then I just happen to have an obscene amount of gear just lying around, and it's, you know, it's a waste.
So Nathaniel has a question for you.
Okay.
Just a heads up on the rental for Glazers.
Yeah.
In the past, I've rented stuff there, but they usually want a deposit that they'll hold on whatever card you're using equal to the cost of the piece of equipment.
Yeah.
So the rental per day may only be $20, but if the piece of equipment costs $1,000 retail, they'll actually hold $1,000 on your card until it's returned. So just not to turn anybody off on that, but I didn't want anybody to go down there thinking super cheap, no problem. If you do have a tight budget in the sense of a balance, that can be a barrier for entry. So just wanted to give everybody a heads up that was something we ran into in a past circumstance. So I was trying to save some people some heartache.
Yeah, thanks for that, Nathan. Nathaniel, you know, it's funny, like I you know, that's something that you don't think about, I guess, when you're going to rent. But I mean, and I haven't rented from Glazers in quite a while, so I guess that's, I hadn't even thought about that. But thank you for bringing that up. That is definitely a big portion, because I mean, yeah, you're right, you could just like take the stuff and run, you know. So they do, I mean, it is kind of a security, you're going to get your money back, but from a standpoint of like, if suddenly you have $1,000 just sitting on your credit card, just like as a potential hold, that's something to keep in mind, you know what I mean?
Yeah, we did a video production a while back, and I think it was almost $20,000 worth of gear. The rental fees were like really cheap.
Oh yeah.
But the retail value of all those items was like $20,000.
Was like a ton.
So
yeah,
and so we had to take that into consideration when
like,
we were renting our gear. And I was like, okay, do we need everything on the same day? Can we break this up over a couple weeks? You know, especially being a startup, I'm sure I'm not the only one that is just consistently maintaining a balance. You know, so. Wanted to keep an eye on that. I did have another question too. So obviously I'm loving all the AI. This is great. It's nice to see someone embracing a lot of that. And there's a lot of great tools and resources you provided. One question though is, if we do decide to say we want to go hire somebody, do you have any tips on where to go, specifically local? Because I know that there's a lot of like Fiverr and Upwork and all sorts of stuff where you can go search for somebody to actually shoot and edit the video. Versus finding somebody that's like local is a little bit harder, and it's usually like a friend of a friend. Do you have
Yeah.
any resources if that's something that we want to entertain?
Yeah, I do actually. If you like, I can send it to you direct, or I mean, because I have some people that I know that work in video and film up there, so I can send if that's that. But I mean, I guess from a standpoint of you because you had mentioned Fiverr, but like I guess from a because if you're looking to hire someone, especially to help, because I mean, again, I know some people who like they own their own production companies and they do a lot of video work like for like Microsoft and the rest, so they have all the gear and all the stuff, right? So I mean, I would have to find out from them like their rate. I have to double check their rate again because it's been a while since I've worked with them. But if you're interested, I'm happy to send the resources your way for sure.
Yeah, I think it's just hard to be able to find. I think specifically what I've struggled with is finding people, production companies that are on board with the story, which is another part of what I really appreciated you bringing up is, going through like the whole story brand perspective. And that's something that I have had a very hard time finding creatives that have not only aware of the concept, but much less read the book or understood the background of the whole story brand aspect. And that's something that specifically in the brand we've really tried to lean into, but it's very hard to find creatives that are on that same page. Plenty of people that will say, hey, I'll show up with the camera, I'll help you do this and help you do that. And it's like, no, I need somebody who specifically understands what we're doing in that kind of story brand perspective.
Yeah, no, excellent. Okay, well then if you like I said, so after this we're done, I'll email you some people to reach out to, because I have one guy in particular I think will be who's a Seattle local who's very good at what he does. Yeah,
very cool. Yeah, no, looking forward to it. And I think you and I meet tomorrow anyway. So
yeah, exactly. We'll be fine. Cool. Yeah, we got a whole thing.
Yeah.
Be like we'll grab so it'll be like a Zoom beer. It'll be great.
Yeah, let's do it. Cool. Thank you, man. I really appreciate all the intel today.
Of course. Yeah, I hope it was somewhat helpful. You know what I mean? I know like we have like a variety of different skill levels. So I'm like, well, we're gonna hopefully cover kind of a gamut and just like hopefully some people find some things useful. And again, a lot of, like I said, the AI stuff is still so new. I was just like, but I got so excited. I was like diving down deep in like Midjourney and the rest of those. Like I was like, this is way too fun to just because.
Yeah.
I was like, I mean, you can create all this crazy stuff, and it's way too cool now that you can just do this without like any sort of potential. Like I don't have to sit there and spend all this time drawing. Like I was like, oh, let's see if we can kind of create like a animation for like a if it was like a Pixar movie or something. And then I mean, unbelievable stuff you can come up with. It's anyway, so it's crazy.
Yeah, I went down a rabbit hole down Runway the other night, and like, yeah, I won't say what time I went to bed, but
I respect that.
Not my first time. So cool. Well, very cool.
Yeah.
Even as somebody who's had mild experience doing this stuff, there's a lot of great resources. So thank you.
Oh, good, excellent. I'm glad you found it helpful. I was like said trying to piece it all together, and again, I'll send the additional resources will have like a bunch of extra stuff like links and download whatever again, and all like specific recommendations in terms of, and then everything from like screenwriting stuff and everything else, even like some like books that I recommend you check out too if you're interested in going down that extra rabbit hole. But anyway, so yeah.
Thanks.
Yeah, is any other questions from peeps, thoughts? Thanks, Pierce. Appreciate it. Yeah.
Eunice, you unmuted yourself. Did you want to ask a question? Charity, you're also unmuted. All right. And I just hope that all of you will have a chance to meet with Corbin one-on-one, and then you can ask your questions directly.
Yeah, I mean, well, hopefully I reach out hopefully to quite a few of you. If you haven't if we haven't spoken yet or haven't set up our meeting, just please feel free to reach out, or I will try to reach back out to you. I'd love to meet with you one-on-one, talk about your video and like ways to improve and strategies that we can potentially employ. And hopefully like taking these concepts and then making them to your video, because again, I try to cover just like surface level as much as I could, but obviously everybody's different and everybody has their own needs, so awesome.